They say a good bartender can keep any secret, but I came to Fog's End to forget one. I came to drown the memory of a little girl's face, framed by fire, her eyes wide with a terrified trust I failed to honor. After that, the camaraderie of the smoke jumpers, the roar of the plane, it all felt like a lie. So I ran, not from the law, but from the ghosts. I ran until I found myself deep in the Appalachian hollows, answering a faded, rain-blotched flyer for a caretaker and proprietor at a place that wasn't on any map. The bar is called Fog's End. It's a splinter of a place, a wound in time, a building made of dark wood and darker secrets that only materializes when the fog gets thick enough to feel like it has a pulse. The owner was a gaunt, ancient man named Elias, who spoke in whispers and looked at me with eyes that had seen too many sunrises. He gave me a set of heavy iron keys, a bottle of impossibly old unopened whiskey, and a handwritten note on the back of a tattered postcard. It contained 3 rules. Don't pour beer for a werewolf when the fog is covering the bar. Never break up the poker game at table 6. Everyone playing lost their life to the house, and they're betting for their souls when the Beast of Bladenboro enters, and all customers freeze in terror. You must offer it your strongest memory in a shot glass filled with your tears. The bar has its regulars. Elias had rasped, his voice like stones grinding together, and it has its rules. The rules keep the peace. You keep the peace, the bar will keep you. Then he walked out the door and vanished into the swirling white mist, leaving me alone. The air inside Fog's End is thick, a palpable entity. It smells of wet pine from the deep woods outside, the sweet, malty scent of spilled bourbon from 100 years of lonely nights, and beneath it all, the sharp, metallic tang of regret. The silence is the worst part. It's not empty. It's a listening, waiting silence, broken only by the low murmurs of its strange patrons and the soft, constant shuffle of cards from table 6 deity. The last bartender, a woman named Mira, supposedly just walked out into the fog 3 years ago and never came back. But last night, while wiping down the heavy dark wood of the bar top, I found her name, carved into the underside with what must have been a fingernail, and next to it, a single, desperate, jagged word. Remember. My first night was a slow descent into a new kind of reality. The patrons were unique. A man sat in the far corner, his features always obscured by shadow, his eyes seeming to shine with a faint lupine yellow. A woman with skin like pale moonlight and hair like spun silk nursed a single glass of ice water, never touching the drink, her sorrow a tangible cold spot in the room. And at table 6, the poker game went on, as it apparently always did. 4 men, their faces etched with a profound, eternal weariness, playing with stained, ancient cards. Their leader, a man the others called Rafferty, was a ghost in a worn flannel shirt. I knew he was a ghost because I could see the dim outline of the bottles on the shelf right through his chest. They never spoke to me, never ordered drinks. They just played, the soft click of their chips the only steady sound in the room. I was cleaning glasses, my back to the room, when a sudden heavy fog rolled in, not from the open door, but from the floorboards themselves. It was thick, white, and cold, swirling around my ankles, smelling of damp earth and ozone. It deadened the already faint sounds of the bar, wrapping the room in an intimate, claustrophobic shroud. And from the corner, a low, gravelly voice said, "Bartender, a beer." I turned. It was the man with the yellow eyes. The werewolf. His knuckles were white where he gripped the edge of his table, his body tense, fighting some internal battle. The first rule screamed in my mind, "Don't pour beer." My hand hovered over the tap for a brand I didn't recognize. Its handle a carved wolf's head. My heart hammered. Was this a test? A local custom? A joke? But the desperation in his eyes, the raw, animal plea for something to quench a thirst that wasn't for alcohol, felt terrifyingly real. I made a choice. My hand moved away from the beer tap and towards the simple spigot for water. I filled a heavy glass, the water shockingly clear against the murky fog, and placed it on the bar. "On the house," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The man stared at the glass of water, then up at me. A long, tense moment passed. Then he gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. It was a nod of grim, weary understanding. He stood, his large frame seeming to unfold from the chair, and walked out the door, vanishing into the night without a backward glance. The fog on the floor seemed to sigh. Then slowly, it thinned and dissipated, leaving the air tasting of electricity. The peace had been kept. I let out a shaky breath I didn't realize I'd been holding as I went to retrieve the untouched glass of water from the bar. I saw a message traced in the condensation that had formed on the dark, polished wood. 10 faint, shaky letters, as if written by a ghost's finger. "He eats memories. Don't feed him. He eats memories." The werewolf's silent acknowledgement and the ghostly message on the bar solidified a terrifying truth. The rules were not suggestions. They were laws of nature in this unnatural place. I started my own quiet investigation, a habit from a former life where understanding the environment was key to survival. I began looking for anything left behind by Mira, the bartender who had vanished. Her locker in the small back room was empty, scrubbed clean, but in the dusty space behind it, I found a small, water-damaged notebook. Most of the pages were awash of blurred ink, but a few frantic entries were just legible. "Silas knows too much. He asks about the beast. He asks about memory. Not like a scholar, like a chef asking about ingredients." And another, "Rafferty tried to warn me. The cards. Always watch the cards. Silas. I hadn't met a Silas, but I filed the name away." The next few nights were a tense routine. I served drinks to sad-eyed ghosts and quiet, watchful creatures, my senses on a razor's edge. The poker game at table 6 was my constant, a quiet tableau of the damned. I watched old man Rafferty, the ghost in the flannel shirt. He played with a quiet, focused intensity, his movements economical, his eyes holding a century of sorrow. He never looked at me, but I started to feel like the game wasn't just for the players. It was a performance for me. On the third night, a pair of new patrons stumbled in. 2 rowdy spirits that looked like lumberjacks from the 1920s, still smelling of pine sap and spectral whiskey. They were loud, boisterous, and after a few drinks, they started a fight. A clumsy, slow-motion brawl of swinging fists that passed harmlessly through each other. Their argument began to drift closer and closer to table 6. My bartender's instinct, the ingrained need to maintain order, took over. I rounded the bar, my hand out. "All right, fellas, let's take it outside," I said, my voice firm. The moment I stepped within 5 feet of table 6, the 4 poker players stopped. The soft shuffling of cards ceased. 4 pairs of weary, ghostly eyes lifted from their hands and fixed on me. The collective weight of their gaze was a physical force, a wall of pure, concentrated despair that stopped me in my tracks. It was a silent, absolute refusal. "That'll be, son," old man Rafferty said, his voice a dry, dusty whisper that seemed to come from all corners of the room at once. "This here's a private game. The ante's too high for outsiders." He looked back down at his cards, the silent dismissal more powerful than any threat. The 2 lumberjack spirits, suddenly sobered by the immense pressure from the table, faded away into nothingness. I retreated behind the bar, my heart pounding. Rule of #2, never break up the poker game. I had come dangerously close. Later that night, as the bar was nearing its quietest hour, Rafferty coughed, a dry, soundless gesture. He laid his cards face up on the table, folding his hand. Then he looked directly at me for the first time, his eyes holding a deep, meaningful sadness. He tapped the cards with a translucent finger before fading slightly, his attention returning to the game. I walked over. The cards he had displayed were a strange, deliberate set. 2 black aces, 2 black 8s, and laid slightly apart from them a single crimson queen of hearts, the dead man's hand, the hand held by Wild Bill Hickok when he was shot dead. It was a message of death, and a clue. The Lonely Queen. Just as I was puzzling over the meaning, the front door opened, letting in a swirl of thick white fog. A man stepped inside, shaking the damp from his tweed coat. He was in his early 30s, with a charming, academic air, handsome and well-spoken. "Quite a place you have here," he said, his eyes scanning the room with a scholar's curiosity. He saw the cards on table 6. "Ah, the dead man's hand," he said with a knowledgeable smile, approaching the bar. "A classic omen, but the queen, that's an addition. The Queen of Hearts. In some older traditions, she represents a lost lady, a queen in the underworld, perhaps the lost lady of this very bar." He looked at me, his eyes bright with intelligence. "My name is Silas Dorn. I'm a folklorist, writing a book on the unique legends of this specific region. You must be the new bartender." Silas Dorn had become a new regular. He was a welcome, if unsettling, presence. He was charming, intelligent, and human, a stark contrast to the bar's usual clientele. He'd sit at the bar for hours, nursing a single whiskey, asking me questions about the patrons, the rules, the feel of the place. He claimed it was for his research, and I, desperate for a connection to the world of logic and reason, found myself confiding in him. I told him about the werewolf, the poker game, the ghostly message on the bar. He listened with rapt attention, nodding, taking notes in a small leather-bound book. "Fascinating," he'd murmur. "Classic genius loci manifestations. The rules you were given are clearly apotropaic rituals, designed to appease or ward off specific entities. They're a form of folk magic, a living grimoire." He made the horror sound like a footnote in an academic paper, and it was strangely comforting. But my investigation into Mira's disappearance continued. Her fragmented journal entries became my guide. "Silas, he knows too much. His questions are not right." And another entry. "The beast only comes when the sorrow is strong enough. It's drawn to a broken heart like a shark to blood. The Beast of Bladenboro, the 3rd rule." It was the one I feared most. I asked Silas about it. "Ah, the beast," he said, a gleam in his eye. "A fascinating cryptid, usually described as a vampiric, cat-like creature from North Carolina. It's very unusual for its legend to appear this far north. It suggests a confluence of psychic energies here. A nexus." He made it sound exciting. I felt a cold knot of dread. 1 week into my tenure, it happened. The night was quiet, the air heavy. The only patrons were the poker players at table 6, and a lone weeping ghost in the corner, a young man in a Wejui uniform, endlessly mourning a lovehead left in France. The sorrow in the room was a tangible thing, a thick, cloying blanket of despair. And then the silence came. Not the usual quiet of the bar, but a sudden, absolute void of sound. The poker players froze, their cards hovering in midair. The weeping ghost fell silent. The low hum from the ancient refrigerator behind the bar ceased. The world went deaf. The door creaked open. It padded into the room on silent pause. A creature made of liquid shadow and deepest night. It was large, panther-like, its form constantly shifting and coalescing, its fur the color of a starless sky. Its eyes were not eyes, but 2 orbs of soft, sorrowful, glowing silver light. It was the Beast of Bladenboro. Its presence was preceded by the smell of ozone, wet earth, and heartbreak. It ignored me. Its silver gaze fell upon the weeping soldier. The patrons, all of them, were frozen, statues in a tableau of terror. I remembered the rule. Offer it your strongest memory in a shot glass filled with your tears. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely move. My strongest memory. The fire, the little girl's face. The one thing in the world I wanted to forget. I grabbed a clean shot glass from the shelf, my movements stiff and clumsy. I placed it on the bar. I closed my eyes and forced myself to remember, not the vague outlines, but every detail. The smell of burning pine and melting plastic. The searing heat on my face. The sound of the roof groaning. The exact shade of the flames reflected in her wide, terrified eyes as the ceiling collapsed. The memory was a physical thing. A shard of hot metal in my soul. A single hot tear, thick with a year's worth of unshed grief, escaped my eye and dropped into the shot glass with a faint hiss, my hand trembling. I pushed the glass down the polished bar. It slid silently, stopping directly in front of the beast. The creature lowered its shadowy head. It didn't drink. It seemed to inhale, to breathe in the essence from the glass. The air shimmered. The weeping soldier in the corner let out a thin, confused wail. "Annette," he whispered. Who is Annette?" He looked around, his ghostly face a mask of sudden, profound emptiness. The memory of his great love, the sorrow that had defined his afterlife, had been consumed, wiped clean. He flickered, then dissolved into a faint wisp of smoke, his anchor to this world gone. The beast, sated, raised its head and looked at me. Its silver eyes held a moment of something that felt terrifyingly like gratitude. Then, it turned and dissolved back into the shadows from which it came. The sound of the bar, the cards shuffling. The hum of the fridge crashed back in as the terror slowly receded. A new horrifying sound took its place. A faint rhythmic creaking from the back of the bar. It was coming from the walk-in freezer, a place I had never had cause to open. It sounded like someone was weakly knocking from the inside. A phantom warmth, a stark contrast to the room's chill, seemed to emanate from the heavy steel door. I pulled the latch, my heart pounding. The door swung open, releasing a billow of supernatural cold. There, huddled in the corner, covered in a thick layer of frost, was a woman. She was pale, her lips blue, but she was alive. It was Mira, the lost bartender. Her eyes, wide and terrified, met mine. "He's not feeding the beast," she whispered, her voice a fragile, frosty rasp. "He's farming it." And then, as if the effort was too much, her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed, vanishing back into the impossible cold of the freezer. Mira's appearance, her cryptic warning, changed everything. Silas wasn't just a scholar. He was a player in this game. And farming the beast implied a harvest, a purpose. The next time the fog rolled in, I was ready. I was watching him. But that night, someone new stumbled into the bar. A young woman, maybe 21, with a backpack and rain-soaked hair. She was a hiker who had gotten turned around in the sudden, unnatural fog. A real, living, ordinary person. Her name was Emily. She told me, her teeth chattering from the cold. She stared around the bar, at the werewolf in the corner and the ghostly poker players, with a wide-eyed, disbelieving terror. She was an anomaly, an injection of pure, mundane reality into this closed system of folklore and pain. Her presence seemed to disrupt the very atmosphere of the bar. The shadows seemed less deep, the silence less oppressive, when the beast appeared for its nightly feeding. Drawn by the sorrow of another one of the bar's permanent residents, it padded right past M, its silver eyes not even registering her. Her memories, simple and untraumatized, were like bland, unseasoned food to it. She was invisible, a control group, and I saw in Silas' eyes, for the first time, a flicker of genuine annoyance. An unpredictable variable he hadn't accounted for. That was all the confirmation I needed. After the beast had gone, And after I had calmed the terrified M with a stiff, warm brandy, I confronted him. "Farming it, Silas," I said, my voice low and cold. "That's what Mira said. That's what Mira said. What are you harvesting?" Silas Dorn's charming, academic facade finally crumbled. He didn't look angry. He looked tired. He sighed, a sound of immense ancient weariness. "I had hoped you would be a more passive caretaker, Cassian," he said. "Mere of us for a time. But curiosity is a powerful poison." He stood up from his stool. "You are correct. I am not merely a folklorist. I am the beneficiary of its work." He held up his hand, and for a second it became translucent, a ghostly, shimmering thing. "I am a construct, Cassian. A story held together by the stolen memories of others. A Lich, if you want to use the melodramatic term," he explained. He had been the original keeper of this bar, a descendant of the family that had first trapped the beast. But he had grown ambitious. He'd tried to harness the beast's power and had been consumed by it, killed in this very room decades ago. But before he faded completely, he used his deep knowledge of the bar's rules and the powerful stolen memory of another victim, the memory of their own wedding day, to reconstitute himself. He was a ghost wearing a stolen life, but the memories fade, he said, his voice now cold and hard. They must be replenished. The beast is my collector, and soon the harvest will be great enough to open the Amnesia gate. He pointed to a large, ornate, locked door behind the bar. A door I had assumed led to a cellar, a place where all memories become a liquid, tangible resource. It will grant me truth, stable immortality, the power to finally rewrite my own flawed, failed past. He looked at him, who was cowering near the fireplace. Her blankness is a problem, but your potent, tragic memories, Cassian, they are the final key I need to turn the lock. I need to turn the lock. He reached into his coat and produced a strange, ornate key made of gnarled, petrified wood, stained almost black. "The beast isn't the true power here," he said, walking towards the locked door. "The bar is. It's a psychic engine, fueled by sorrow. And I," he smiled, "a dead, empty thing. I'm about to turn the key and begin the final distillation." The moment Silas inserted the petrified wood key into the ornate lock on the cellar door, the very air in Fog's End fractured. It was not a loud, explosive event, but a deep, resonant thrum, like a colossal tuning fork being struck at the heart of reality. The key turned with a sound of grinding stone and snapping bone. The low, mournful music from the ancient jukebox warped and died. The gentle amber lights of the bar flickered, then blazed with a harsh, sterile, white intensity, stripping away all of the comforting shadows, exposing the raw, ugly truth of the place. The wood of the bar wept a dark, sap-like substance that smelled of ancient grief. The bottles on the shelf rattled, their labels flickering, shifting between brands and eras. The engine of memory was being redlined, and the entire bar was screaming under the strain. "The distillation has begun," Silas declared, his voice no longer a calm baritone, but a high, manic cry of triumph. He stood before the cellar door, which now glowed with a faint, sickly green light from the cracks around its frame. "No more sipping, Cassian. Tonight we drink from the river itself." The fog outside the windows was no longer a gentle, rolling mist. It was a churning, violent vortex, a supernatural hurricane pressing in on the small, impossible sanctuary of the bar. And the chaos it held back was now leaking in. The werewolf in the corner, who had been placidly nursing his water, threw back his head and roared, a sound of pure, untamed agony. The rules were breaking down. The fog was inside the bar now, thick and cold, and his human form surrendered with a wet, tearing sound of shifting bone and stretching skin. He lunged not at me, but at the nearest source of chaotic energy. The ghostly poker table, the game at table 6, erupted. Old Man Rafferty and his companions, who had been locked in their eternal quiet game, were now a whirlwind of phantom rage. They weren't fighting over cards anymore. They were physically grappling, their translucent forms flickering wildly as they tried to tear fragments of memory from each other. "My name," one of them shrieked, his voice thin and reedy. He took the memory of my name. The entire bar was becoming a psychic war zone, a hellscape of bleeding realities and warring concepts. And at the center of it all was my own personal ghost. The smell of burning pine hit me first, sharp and acrid. Then the heat, a dry, searing wave that made the air shimmer. The polished wood of the bar began to char and smoke before my eyes. The phantom cries, the ones that lived in the quiet corners of my mind, were now screaming in the room, a chorus of a single, terrified little girl. My failure, my strongest, most defining memory was manifesting, given form and power by the bar's overclocked engine. "She's here, Cassian," Silas taunted, his face alight with ecstatic glee. "Your greatest contribution." Feel the potency of that guilt. That is the fuel that will open the gate. Through the swirling smoke and psychic noise, I saw her, a shimmering, heat haze outline of a small girl, standing where the jukebox had been, her form made of memory and regret, her eyes wide with the same terrified trust I had failed. "Protect her, Cassian," Silas whispered, his voice a venomous serpent in my ear. "Try to save her again." He was using my own trauma as a weapon, a ghost to hold me in place while he completed his ritual, and his target was clear. He turned his gaze to M. Granger, the innocent hiker, the psychic blank slate cowering by the fireplace. "Every grand experiment needs a control group," Silas said, walking towards her. "And every ritual needs a sacrifice. Her purity, her lack of a defining sorrow. She is the perfect empty vessel to pour the universe into. Her soul will be the key that unlocks the door for good." He raised a hand, and the shadows in the room seemed to coalesce around it, forming into long, grasping tendrils. This was it, the final move. But as he approached him, a new voice cut through the chaos, thin and cold and sharp as an icicle. "He lies. Mira." She stood in the open doorway of the walk-in freezer, which was now venting clouds of supernatural cold. She was no longer just pale. She was translucent, wreathed in a shimmering aura of frost, her form held together by sheer will. She couldn't leave the freezer's circle of influence for long, but she was here now. "The gate doesn't need a blank slate, Silas," she said, her voice weak but clear. "It needs a willing heart. You can't sacrifice her. She has to choose to enter." Silas snarled, his carefully constructed composure finally breaking. "You should have stayed frozen, you little fool." At that moment, Rafferty's ghost, finally breaking from the chaos of his table, chose his side. "The girl's right, Silas," the old ghost rasped, appearing beside me, his form flickering like a bad projection. "The house has rules even the owner can't break." Then he looked at me, his eyes filled with a century of regret. "And I know your secret, you memory thief. I was here the night you died. I know whose life you stole to put yourself back together." The revelation hung in the air. Silas wasn't just a descendant. His entire existence was a fraud, built on a stolen foundation. The Beast of Bladenboro chose that moment to manifest, not by walking through the door, but by pouring out of the very shadows of the room. It was larger now, its form less stable, its silver eyes burning with a hunger that was no longer sorrowful, but ravenous. It was the conduit for the ritual, and Silas, enraged, directed it towards the only person who could stop him. Me. The next few moments were a blur of impossible survival. I dodged the beast's shadowy pounce, the air it displaced leaving a trail of frost on the floor. I used a heavy bar stool as a shield against the enraged werewolf. All the while, the phantom of the little girl stood in the corner, her presence a constant, agonizing thrum of my own failure, pinning my soul in place. Mira, from her doorway, pointed a frosty, trembling finger at Silas. His anchor? Whoa! The memory isn't just in his head, Cassian. It's in the bar. The first dollar he ever earned. Rafferty, his form solidifying with a ghostly resolve, nodded. The one he framed behind the whiskey shelf. The one that belonged to Old Man Hemlock. The man who built this place. That's the life you're wearing, Silas. It was a desperate, insane clue. I had to fight my way through a bar full of monsters, past a memory-eating god, to steal back a memory from a man made of them, all while being haunted by the physical manifestation of my own worst nightmare. I looked at Em, cowering but watching me, her eyes a beacon of sane, terrified reality. I looked at the ghost of the girl in the fire, her eyes pleading for a rescue I could never give. I looked at the cellar door, which was beginning to vibrate, the green light within pulsing like a monstrous heart. The last call. It was time to settle the tab. The chaos in Fog's End was no longer just a supernatural phenomenon. It had become a psychic maelstrom, a hurricane of overlapping realities and raw emotion. The Beast of Bladenboro, now a churning vortex of shadow and silver-eyed malice, was a living embodiment of the bar's unleashed power. Silas, his face a mask of incandescent fury, directed the creature not with words, but with pure, focused will. He needed me out of the way to deal with them, his intended sacrifice. I couldn't fight the beast head-on. It was like trying to punch the tide, but Rafferty's and Mira's clues had given me a target. A single point of vulnerability in the storm of impossibility. Silas's anchor, the stolen memory, and stay by the fire. Don't move, I yelled, my voice raw. The fireplace, with its real, honest warmth, seemed to be a small island of stability in the room. I dodged another lunge from the werewolf, shoving a heavy table into its path, and made a break for the bar. Behind the long row of whiskey bottles, amidst a collection of dusty memorabilia, was a small framed dollar bill, yellow with age. Old Man Hemlock's first dollar, 1898. It was the cornerstone of Silas's stolen existence. As I reached for it, the phantom of the little girl from the fire materialized directly in front of me, her form shimmering with heat, her eyes filled with an unbearable, silent accusation. It was my own guilt, weaponized and given form, blocking my path. I couldn't save you, I whispered, the words torn from me, the pain as fresh as if it were yesterday. The beast, sensing the surge of my potent sorrow, changed its target from the general chaos and began to glide towards me. That's it, Cassian, Silas's voice gloated, echoing in the room. Feed him your despair. Drown in it. But then Mira, her voice a frosty whisper from the freezer door, called out, Don't fight the memory, Cassian. Use it. Offer him something else. Something he's never tasted. It was an insane gambit to intentionally feed the memory eater, but I was out of options as the beast loomed over me, its silver eyes promising a sweet, empty oblivion. I didn't push my guilt away. I reached for a different memory, a different fire. I remembered the surge of pride and adrenaline from my first successful jump as a smoke jumper. The roar of the wind, the breathtaking view of the world spread out below, the absolute perfect focus of the mission, the feeling of pure, selfless heroism as my team worked in perfect unison to cut a fire break, saving a whole town. It was a memory of triumph, of purpose, of uncomplicated courage, a flavor, I prayed, that would be completely alien to this creature born of sorrow and betrayal. I focused on that feeling, that memory, and mentally pushed it forward, a deliberate offering. Take it, I projected, not with words, but with will. The beast recoiled as if struck. It had expected the familiar, rich taste of guilt, but instead, it received this bright, sharp, unfamiliar flavor of heroism and camaraderie. It let out a silent, psychic shriek of confusion, its shadowy form flickering and destabilizing for a precious second. Its psychic link with Silas wavered, and in that moment of disruption, I saw it. The world shimmered, and for a fraction of a second, I saw through Silas's eyes. I saw the memory he was using to anchor himself. A grainy, sepia-toned image of a stern, bearded man named Hemlock, proudly hammering the final nail into the bar he had just built. A memory filled with pride, ownership, and creation. It was a powerful foundational memory, and it wasn't his. I now knew what to pull. I lunged, my physical hand reaching for the framed dollar bill on the wall, while my will, my entire consciousness, reached out and pulled at the sepia-toned image in Silas's mind. I wasn't just taking the object. I was reclaiming the concept it represented. Silas screamed, a real human sound of pure agony. No, that's mine. I am Hemlock, but he wasn't. The memory, the very foundation of his being, began to unravel. His form flickered violently, his borrowed face shifting, the features of old man Hemlock warring with the pale, terrified face of the young, ambitious man he had once been. He was coming apart at the seams. He was coming apart at the seams. He made one last, desperate lunge. Not for me, but for M, the empty vessel by the fire. If I am to be undone, he shrieked, his voice a chorus of fading memories, I will take you all into the void. The gate will open. He threw the petrified wood key at the glowing green cellar door. The lock clicked, and the door swung open, revealing not a cellar, but a swirling, silent vortex of pure green, amnesiac energy. The amnesia gate, it began to pull at the room, at the patrons, at the very memories holding the bar together. This was it, the final, terrible distillation. The vortex at the cellar door was a silent, hungry mouth, pulling at the very fabric of our being. The colors in the room began to bleed towards it, the sounds becoming stretched and distorted. I felt my own memories start to fray at the edges. The name of my third-grade teacher, the taste of my mother's cooking, small, insignificant details being drawn into the void. The ghostly poker players at table 6 let out a collective, weary sigh and simply allowed themselves to be pulled apart, their long penance finally over as they dissolved into streamers of forgotten moments. Silas, now a flickering, unstable ghost, cackled with insane glee. We will all be forgotten together. We will all be clean. The Beast of Bladenboro, now free from Silas's control, but drawn to the immense concentration of emotional energy, was poised between me and the gate, its silver eyes glowing with a terrible, final hunger. It was about to consume everything. Mira, from her freezer doorway, looked at me, her eyes filled with a frosty final plea. Cassian, the offering. It must be absolute. To close the gate, you have to give it the one thing that matters most. You have to give it the fire. I knew what she meant. The memory. My cornerstone. The source of my pain, my guilt, my entire broken identity. The memory of the girl I couldn't save. It was the most powerful, most emotionally charged memory in the room. It was the only thing potent enough to overload the beast, to slam the gate shut on this tide of oblivion. But to give it up, that meant not just forgetting. It meant being absolved. It meant becoming someone else. Someone who hadn't failed. Someone empty. I looked at him, her face pale with terror, clutching a chair to anchor herself against the psychic pull. I looked at the vortex, threatening to consume her innocent, unwritten life, and I looked at the shimmering phantom of the little girl, who was now looking at me not with accusation, but with a sad, simple plea for release. My choice was made. I stood, turned my back on the gate, and faced the beast. I didn't offer the memory with anger or with fear. I offered it with a profound, soul-shaking acceptance. I let it all come. The smell of the smoke, the heat, the sound of her small voice, the crushing weight of the fallen beam, the sight of her hand disappearing into the flames. My own helpless, useless scream. I poured every ounce of my guilt, my failure, my identity as a broken man, into one perfect, crystalline offering. "Take it," I whispered. "Please. Let her go." The beast lowered its head and drank. It drank my fire, my failure, my very soul. The psychic intake was so powerful it brought me to my knees, a soundless scream tearing through my mind. It was an agony beyond all pain. The feeling of my own history being ripped out by the roots. The phantom of the little girl looked at me one last time, a faint, sad smile on her lips, and then she faded, not into smoke, but into soft, gentle light. She was free. The offering was too much. The beast, a creature fed on sips of sorrow, was now force-fed, an ocean of pure, distilled agony. It convulsed, its shadowy form blazing with a brilliant silver light. It was overloaded, sated beyond its capacity for 1,000 years, with a final silent roar that cracked the very air in the bar. It dissolved, its energy imploding, collapsing the vortex behind it. The cellar door slammed shut with the force of a thunderclap, and the key in the lock turned to dust. Silence. The fog outside the windows receded, revealing a normal, moonlit forest. The werewolf was just a terrified, naked man, huddled in the corner. Silas Dawn was gone, a small pile of dust, and a single framed dollar bill, all that was left of him. Mira stood in a freezer door, a sad, permanent ghost, her duty done. And I was still the bartender. But the man who had walked in a few weeks ago was gone. The core of him, the defining tragedy, had been scooped out, leaving a hollow, peaceful calm. I looked at Em, who was staring at me, her eyes full of questions. I knew I had saved her, but I couldn't remember why it had been so important. The memory of the fire, the reason I had come to Fog's End, was a blank space, a missing page. The epilogue is quiet. Em Granger stumbles out of the bar and finds herself on a normal hiking trail, with no memory of Fog's End, only a strange feeling of lost time and a vague sense of gratitude towards a sad-eyed bartender. Rafferty's poker game is over. His spirit, his penance served by his final act of truth, finds peace and fades away. Mira remains, a silent, frosty sentinel, the bar's eternal, chilling secret. I am still the bartender. I am calm. I am at peace. The guilt that drove me is gone, but so is the heroism, the fire, the man I once was. I am a shell, a keeper of a place I don't remember choosing. The final image, a new patron, a lost soul with haunted eyes, and a past they are desperate to escape, stumbles into the bar as the fog rolls in once again. I polish a glass, my movements smooth and practiced, my own eyes empty and calm. I slide the handwritten list of rules down the bar towards the newcomer. The cycle has been preserved, the house has been saved, but the bartender, the ultimate keeper of secrets, now has none of his own left to keep. He is simply a part of the bar, forever waiting for the fog to roll in, and for the next story to begin.